I overheard my daughter call me poor old plumber while speaking to her friends on the phone. She didn't know I owned 75% shares in the biggest manufacturing company in the city. When she met me at her job interview, the unexpected happened. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Andrew Cole from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. They all think I'm just a plumber. And I guess, in many ways, that's exactly what I've let them believe. There's something comforting about being overlooked. Fewer expectations, fewer questions, and far fewer people trying to manipulate you for what they think you're worth. I've always enjoyed working with my hands. There's an honesty in it. Pipes don't lie. Valves don't gossip behind your back. Fixtures don't look you in the eye and pretend to respect you while quietly thinking you're beneath them. But people, especially family, that's where things get complicated. I started the plumbing business when I was 23, fresh off an apprenticeship and full of grit. By the time I hit 35, I had already begun investing in other companies, quietly, smartly, without needing to boast about it at the dinner table. One of those investments bloomed beyond anyone's expectations, a manufacturing firm that went from modest to massive in under a decade. And by some careful maneuvering, a few timely buyouts, and a lot of silence, I ended up with a 75% stake. Still, I kept my overalls on and my mouth shut. My daughter, Lila, is 22 now. She's always been sharp, sharp-tongued, sharp-dressed, and sharp with her judgments, especially about appearances. I don't know where she got that from, certainly not me. Maybe from my wife's side, or maybe just from the world. I tried to raise her right, kept her grounded, made her work summers in the family business, scrubbed floors right beside her, but somewhere along the way, image became everything to her. I noticed the change when she turned 16. Suddenly, my work boots embarrassed her. My pickup truck wasn't cool. She started introducing me to her friends as just my dad, with a nervous laugh, like I might open my mouth and betray her social standing by talking about busted water heaters. I let it go. I figured it was a phase. But phases aren't supposed to last 6 years. Last week, I came home early and heard her in the kitchen. She was on the phone, laughing that laugh she saves for people she wants to impress. "No, seriously," she said, her voice echoing off the tile. "My dad's just some poor old plumber. I'd die if anyone at the company saw us together. I'm gonna ace the interview, though. I've been prepping for weeks." She kept talking, but I stopped listening. Something inside me pulled tight, like a pipe under too much pressure. It wasn't the words that cut me, not exactly. It was the casual cruelty, the ease with which she reduced me to nothing, all while angling to get her foot in the door of the very place I helped build from the ground up. I stood in the hallway, invisible in my own home, and let the sting settle into my chest. I didn't walk in and correct her. I didn't clear my throat or make a scene. I just backed away, real quiet, like I wasn't supposed to be there. That night, I lay in bed next to my wife, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slow circles in the dark. She noticed I was quiet, but I brushed it off. I didn't want to start something I couldn't finish. Still, a seed had been planted in my mind. I thought about everything I'd built, how I'd stayed silent, humble, invisible by choice, and how that same invisibility had turned me into a punchline for my own daughter. Was I wrong to hide what I owned? Maybe. But was I wrong to expect some baseline respect, even if I'd just been a plumber? Absolutely not. That's when I decided I wouldn't stop her from applying to the company. In fact, I'd do the opposite. I'd encourage her. But I wouldn't lift a finger to help her behind the scenes. If she was going to walk through those doors thinking she could climb her way to the top, she'd do it based on her own merit. No shortcuts. No family favors. No plumber dad to prop her up. 2 days later, over breakfast, I told her the company had an opening in the junior development division. "I know someone on the inside," I said casually, sipping my coffee. "Want me to go with you to drop off your application?" She barely looked up from her phone. "No, Dad," she said, irritation sharpening her tone. "That's super embarrassing. I'll go on my own." I nodded, biting down the swell of hurt that rose in my throat. Embarrassing. That's what I'd become to her. Not a mentor. not a father. Just a reminder of everything she was trying to escape. Still, I smiled like it didn't matter. All right, I said, getting up to rinse my mug. Just thought I'd offer. Later that afternoon, I ironed a collared shirt and polished my shoes. I left the overalls in the garage and drove to the company building in my other car, the one I never bring home. The one no one knows I own. I parked in the executive lot and took the elevator to the top floor. When I walked into the boardroom, the other two panelists were already reviewing resumes. They greeted me warmly, as always, and we got to work. At precisely 2 p.m., the receptionist buzzed in the next candidate. I looked up as the door opened, and there she was. Lila, dressed to impress, resume in hand, confidence written all over her face, until her eyes locked with mine. She stopped short in the doorway, a flicker of confusion flashing across her expression. For a moment, I wondered if she'd turn and walk out. But she didn't. She swallowed hard, squared her shoulders, and walked in like nothing had happened. I gave a polite nod, keeping my face neutral. No favoritism, no recognition, just another candidate in the room. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like a father again, not because I was there to rescue her, but because I was finally going to let her face the world as it really is. The morning of her interview, Lila floated around the house like she was already employed. She had on that white blouse she saves for important days, the one that cost more than my first set of wrenches. Her hair was perfectly straightened, nails fresh, voice syrupy sweet with just a hint of smugness. I watched her from the kitchen, quietly sipping my coffee while she paced the living room rehearsing lines from what must have been her self-written pitch. "I'm passionate about scaling innovative solutions," she said to the air, her eyes full of fire. "I thrive under pressure." I nearly choked on my coffee. Passionate. Pressure. She didn't even know what that meant. Not really. Not in the way someone does when they've had to fix a sewage line in 90-degree heat with their knees in 6 inches of muck. But I didn't say a word. I let her rehearse. Let her believe. Let her walk into that building thinking it owed her something just for showing up. As she gathered her things and headed toward the door, I stood and reached for my keys. "Want me to come with you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Moral support? Maybe grab lunch after? I already knew the answer, but I asked anyway. Part of me still hoping there was a sliver of daughter left under all that polish. She paused, clutching her handbag like it was a lifeline, and gave me this look, half annoyed, half apologetic, like I was a child asking for too much attention. "Dad, no offense, but that's not a good idea," she said, voice lowering to that condescending whisper people use when they're ashamed. "What if someone sees us together? You don't exactly fit the vibe." She offered a tight smile, clearly trying to soften the blow, but it hit hard anyway. My jaw tightened, but I kept the smile on my face. I've dealt with worse insults from strangers, but from your own blood, it hits different, right? I said, fishing for my lighter even though I quit smoking 5 years ago. "Don't want to ruin your image." She didn't respond, just turned on her heel and walked out, heels clicking with purpose like she was already the boss of something. I watched her through the window as she got into her car, a sleek little hatchback I helped her buy when she got into college. I remembered how proud she'd been when she first got it, hugging me like she used to when she was 10 and scraped her knee. That girl was gone now. In her place was someone I barely recognized, someone who had forgotten what it meant to be proud of where you came from, even if it wasn't shiny or perfect or Instagram ready. I waited until her taillights disappeared before I went to change into my suit. The office building was 20 minutes away. I took the long route, giving myself time to breathe, to prepare. I hadn't been to many interviews in years. I didn't need to, but I'd insisted on sitting in today. Not just because Lila was coming in, but because I'd been meaning to remind the board what kind of people we should be hiring. The other two panelists, Carla from HR and Mitchell from operations, were sharp, no-nonsense types who didn't care about last names or smiles. They valued effort, humility, and the ability to solve problems without acting like the smartest person in the room. It was exactly the kind of space I hoped Lila would thrive in, if she could drop the mask long enough to show her real self. When she walked into that boardroom, I felt it. The shift, the way her confidence cracked at the edges. She didn't expect to see me there. Her eyes widened just slightly, lips parted like she might say something, but then she didn't. She caught herself and straightened her back like a soldier going into battle. I could almost hear her thoughts scrambling to process the situation. What is he doing here? Why didn't he tell me? Does this mean? Oh God, he's on the panel? But she said nothing. Just walked in, handed Carla her resume, and took a seat across from us like a stranger. Carla started the questioning, asking about her background, her studies, her favorite projects in school. Mitchell jumped in with technical queries, questions about supply chain management, lean processes, profit margins. Lila did well enough, but I could see her slipping. She was nervous, not because the questions were hard, but because she knew someone in that room knew the truth about her. She couldn't rely on the illusion she'd built. She couldn't fake her way through, not with me sitting right there in a suit, watching like I wasn't her father. When it was my turn, I asked her about teamwork. Tell me about a time you failed in a group setting and how you handled it. Her eyes flicked to mine, just for a second, and I could see the panic behind them. She fumbled, told a story about a class project where some people didn't pull their weight, and how she stepped up to lead. It was polished, generic, safe, but not honest. After the interview, she bolted from the room like it was on fire. I didn't see her again until hours later when I got home. She was waiting for me in the garage, arms crossed, eyes blazing. You set me up, she said before I even closed the car door. You knew I was applying there. Why didn't you tell me? You humiliated me. I leaned against the car, keeping my voice calm. I wanted to see what you'd do on your own. She stepped forward, fists clenched at her sides. You could have warned me. I was unprepared. You let me look like an idiot. I shook my head slowly. I let you show them who you are. That's not the same thing. She stared at me, searching for something. An apology, a sign of regret, maybe even shame. But I gave her none of it. You've been chasing a version of success that has nothing to do with work, I told her. You want the title, the desk, the prestige. But what about the effort, the sweat, the respect for the people who built that company from nothing? Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time in years, she didn't have a comeback. She turned and stormed back into the house, slamming the door behind her. I stood in the garage a while longer, breathing in the familiar scent of motor oil and sawdust, the place where I'd built everything from scratch, including the life that gave her the privilege to dream as big as she did. Maybe one day she'd see that. Maybe not. Either way, the mask had cracked, and there was no putting it back on. The room was too quiet once she left. Carla shuffled her papers. Mitchell tapped a pen against the table, and I just sat there with my hands folded neatly on the oak surface, staring at the door like it might swing open again and give me one more look at the daughter I barely recognized. It was strange, watching her walk in earlier like I was no more than another obstacle on her path to success. Not a father, not a guide, just a face on a panel she didn't prepare for. She hadn't even said hello, not really. Just a stiff nod, like that would somehow undo the truth hanging between us. I wanted to believe it was nerves. I wanted to believe, deep down, that some part of her was proud I was there, that some small flicker of admiration had sparked when she saw me seated among the decision-makers. But if it did, it died quickly beneath the weight of her embarrassment. We debriefed after the interview, just like we always did, though my heart wasn't fully in it. Carla went first, professional and concise. She's smart, but green, she said, flipping through her notes. Confident, maybe a little too much. Her answers felt rehearsed. Mitchell nodded. I got the same impression. She name-dropped a few buzzwords, but didn't back them up. Could be coachable, but she's not ready for the client-facing stuff. She'd fold under pressure. I waited a moment before speaking. She's ambitious, I said carefully. But she's still thinking like a student, not a professional. Neither of them looked surprised by my tone. They didn't know she was my daughter. I'd kept that part hidden. There was no nepotism in this room, no favoritism waiting in the wings. Just 3 panelists, 3 opinions, and a girl who didn't know how close she came to standing on a foundation her father poured with his own 2 hands. The silence on the drive home was louder than the boardroom ever could have been. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't check my phone. I just drove, hands steady on the wheel, mind swirling with every expression that crossed her face during the interview. The hesitation, the panic, the forced confidence. It was like watching her teeter on a ledge built out of ego and half-truths. unwilling to ask for help, terrified to fall. I remembered when she used to run to me for everything: spilled juice, scraped knees, boys who didn't text back. Now, she wouldn't even let me be seen walking beside her in a parking lot. Somewhere along the way, she'd mistaken humility for weakness and image for value. And maybe, just maybe, I had let that happen by keeping too much of myself hidden for too long. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was already there. I half expected her to be waiting by the door again, arms crossed, ready to lash out. But she wasn't. The lights were on, the TV humming in the background, but no sign of her. I walked inside, set my keys down, and headed for the kitchen, hoping maybe a cup of coffee would take the edge off. That's when I heard her voice, low, bitter, barely masking the tremble underneath. "You humiliated me." I turned around slowly, finding her leaning against the hallway wall like her legs might give out. Her eyes were red, makeup smeared just enough to betray the tears she didn't want me to know about. "You sat there like a stranger," she said. "You didn't say a word. You let me choke in front of those people." I wanted to hug her. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stayed still. "I gave you the same chance I give everyone," I said. "That's what fairness looks like." Her mouth twisted, disbelief etched into every line of her face. "You're my dad," she snapped. "You could have helped me. You should have helped me." I stepped forward, only slightly, but she recoiled like I'd struck her. "You didn't want my help," I reminded her. "You didn't even want people to know we were related. So I respected that. I let you walk in as your own person. Isn't that what you wanted?" She opened her mouth to argue, but no sound came out. For the first time, she was really hearing the words. And maybe, just maybe, understanding them. "I thought I had it," she muttered, voice cracking. "I thought I was ready." I nodded slowly. "You will be," I said. "But not because someone cleared the path for you. Because you built your own way through." The words hung between us like heavy air, thick with everything we weren't saying. She turned her face, trying to hide the shame, the disappointment, not just in me, but in herself. That part hurt more than anything else. Watching her crumble under her own expectations, realizing that the world wouldn't bend just because she asked nicely. "Do you even care how that made me feel?" she asked, voice sharp again, trying to find her footing. I looked like an idiot. I sighed. "You look like someone trying. That's not the same thing." She stormed off again, this time not slamming the door, just disappearing into her room with a soft click of the latch. I stared down the hallway for a long time, coffee growing cold in my hand. The house was too quiet now. The kind of quiet that settles after a storm, but before the real damage is assessed. I leaned against the counter, trying to steady the ache in my chest. I hadn't meant to hurt her. I really hadn't. But I wasn't sorry either. She needed to see that success wasn't a birthright. It wasn't about who your father is, or how you dress, or who you impress in a 30-minute meeting. It's about grit, about growth, about failing, publicly, painfully, and coming back anyway. Later that night, my wife found me sitting in the garage, lights dimmed, hands resting on an old set of blueprints I hadn't touched in years. "What happened?" she asked, voice soft but sharp enough to cut through the silence. I told her everything. The interview, the reactions, the fallout. She shook her head, eyes narrowing. "You couldn't have warned her?" "Just a little." I met her gaze. She didn't want me there at all. I honored that. She didn't like that answer. "You're her father," she said. "You were supposed to protect her." I looked away, staring at a rusted pipe on the workbench. "I did," I whispered, just not in the way she wanted. The tension in the house clung to the walls like old cigarette smoke. Thick, stale, impossible to ignore. Every conversation that week started in silence and ended in sighs. My wife, June, barely looked at me during dinner. She'd stab her fork into her food with more force than necessary, chew like it was an act of protest, and leave the table before her plate was empty. I tried asking her how work was, how her students were doing, whether her mother had called. She'd answer in clipped tones, barely more than a syllable, her eyes fixed on some spot past my shoulder. Lila, on the other hand, stayed holed up in her room, door locked, music playing loud enough to be heard, but not loud enough to break the rules. She didn't say good morning, didn't say good night. I was back to being invisible, but this time, it wasn't by choice. It all came to a head on a rainy Thursday evening when I came home soaked to the bone after fixing a ruptured pipe for a family who couldn't afford to wait. I walked in, boots dripping, hair plastered to my forehead, and found June waiting in the living room with her arms crossed. Her face was a mask of disappointment, not sadness, not anger, just the kind of quiet disapproval that cuts deeper than yelling ever could. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low and steady. I toed off my boots, not bothering to defend myself before I'd even been accused. She didn't wait for me to sit. "Why did you let her go through with that interview? Why didn't you tell her you'd be on the panel?" I dried my hands on a dish rag and leaned against the wall. "Because she made it clear she didn't want me involved." I respected that. June's eyes narrowed. "You respected what? Her pride? Her immaturity? You let her walk into a room completely unprepared. She trusted you to have her back." I felt the fire rising in my chest, but I kept my voice even. "She didn't trust me. She called me a poor old plumber. She said she didn't want anyone knowing I was her father. What kind of back does that need?" June flinched slightly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "She's young." She was trying to impress her friends. I shook my head. She was ashamed. "There's a difference." The silence stretched between us, heavy with history neither of us wanted to unpack in that moment. She finally broke it, softer this time. "You didn't have to let her fail like that." I looked down at the wet floor beneath my feet. "I didn't let her fail. I gave her a fair shot. That's more than most people get." Later that night, after June had retreated upstairs and I was left alone in the kitchen, I sat at the table staring at the untouched dinner plate she'd left for me. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, the kind of comfort food that's supposed to bring people together, but now just felt like a peace offering wrapped in resentment. I pushed it aside and pulled out a bottle of bourbon from the cabinet, pouring 2 fingers and sipping it slowly. I wasn't sure if I was angry or exhausted. Maybe both. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a courtroom where I was both the defendant and the guilty verdict. I'd spent years working in silence, providing without praise, building a life that was stable and solid. And now, suddenly, I was the villain for refusing to hand over a throne to someone who hadn't earned it. The next morning, Lila came downstairs while I was making coffee. She didn't say anything at first, just hovered near the counter, eyes puffy from sleep or tears or both. I waited, giving her space, unsure if she was there to fight or to finally talk. "Mom said you're not going to help me get a second interview," she said flatly. I nodded. "That's right." She crossed her arms, lips pursed. "Why not? You're on the board. You have the power." I stirred sugar into my cup and took a sip before answering. "Because I'm not going to rob you of the chance to earn it the right way." Her eyes flared. "You already did that. You humiliated me. You set me up to fail." I met her glare with a calmness I didn't feel. "No, Lila. You did that to yourself the moment you decided you were too good to be seen with me." She didn't respond, just stood there, blinking hard like the truth was salt in her eyes. I set my cup down and walked past her, heading toward the door. "You're smart," I said as I grabbed my tool bag. "But if you want to succeed in this world, you need more than intelligence. You need humility, and you're not there yet." I left her in the kitchen, still frozen, still silent. That day, I spent 8 hours fixing busted toilets in an old school building downtown. The work was dirty, tedious, unglamorous. But it was honest. I got paid in cash and a handshake. No corner office. No applause. But when I walked away, I knew I'd earned every penny. That weekend, my sister Margie stopped by to drop off some hand-me-down clothes for the kids she tutors. She could tell something was off before she even stepped inside. "What's going on?" she asked, setting a box on the dining table. I filled her in. Everything from the overheard phone call to the interview to the blowout with June. She listened without interrupting, arms folded, head tilted like she was studying me through a microscope. When I was done, she sighed and shook her head. "You know what your problem is? You spent your whole life building a kingdom and forgot to show your kid she's the princess." I bristled. I showed her through hard work. Margie gave me a look that only an older sister can pull off. "No, you showed her you didn't think she could handle the truth. And now she resents you for it." I didn't want to admit she was right, but she had a point. Maybe I'd been too focused on making her prove herself that I'd forgotten she was still learning what that meant. But I also knew this. If I had bailed her out, if I had whispered answers in her ear or greased the wheels behind closed doors, she would have never learned the value of failure. And worse, she'd keep believing that my silence equaled shame. I was tired of living like that. Tired of letting her wear my identity like a burden she didn't ask for. It was time she saw me for who I really was. Not just her father, but a man who earned everything he had without needing permission from anyone. It started with a whisper, those sharp, slicing little fragments of conversation that slither through hallways and into inboxes before anyone has a chance to stop them. I didn't know exactly how the word got out, but by Monday morning, people were talking. One of the junior assistants from HR must have connected the dots. Maybe she saw the surname. Maybe someone overheard a hallway conversation. Either way, by the time Lila showed up for her afternoon class at the university, half her department knew that the poor old plumber she'd been embarrassed about was not only part of the board at the manufacturing firm, but the controlling shareholder. And not only had she failed the interview, she'd done it in front of the man she called Dad just days earlier with a smirk in her voice and shame in her tone. The social media posts were subtle at first. A meme about karma. A vague status update about never underestimating people who keep quiet. But then someone tagged her, lightheartedly, maybe, but with just enough venom to leave a mark. A girl from one of her study groups shared a screenshot of her resume, not directly, but everyone knew it was her. The caption read, "When you prep for a job interview like it's a Vogue shoot and forget to read the company mission statement." The likes piled up fast. Lila didn't say anything about it to me, not directly, but I could see it in the way she moved through the house. Her confidence was quieter now, more hesitant. She didn't bounce into rooms or toss her hair like a battle flag anymore. She slipped through doorways like a shadow, and every time she saw me, she looked like she was hoping I'd disappear first. June, meanwhile, was still angry, but not just with me anymore. The weight of the embarrassment had started to reach her too. She was a teacher at a well-known school, and a few of her co-workers had caught wind of the situation. "It's all anyone was talking about in the break room today," she said one night as she stirred a pot of stew with more force than necessary. "You've turned our daughter into a punchline." I leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching the steam rise from the pot. "No," I said quietly. She did that when she decided who was worth respecting based on their job title. June whirled around, spoon in hand, eyes full of fire. "She's 22, for God's sake. She's still learning. Her voice cracked, "You're the adult. You're supposed to lead with love." Those words stung more than I wanted to admit. I thought I had been leading with love. I thought refusing to hand her success on a silver platter was love. I thought letting her fail on her own terms was love. But now, love looked like a cracked phone screen she kept turned face down, unread messages piling up from friends who didn't know how to comfort her without laughing behind their hands. One night, I heard her crying in her room, muffled, frustrated sobs that made me press my fist against the door, not to knock, just to feel something solid between us. I stood there for a full minute, then walked away without a word. There's only so much you can say when the truth has already been said and the hurt is still too fresh to let it land. A few days later, I ran into an old friend of mine at the gas station, Paul, a fellow tradesman who'd known me back when I really was just a plumber with 2 busted knees and a dream. He leaned against his truck and said, "Heard about your girl. Tough break." I nodded. "She's taking it hard." Paul gave me a look that said he understood more than he was saying. "Kids today don't realize how lucky they are when they've got someone like you in their corner." I didn't answer. Didn't feel like I deserved the compliment. But then he added, "You taught her something she won't learn in school. She'll hate you for a while, but she'll thank you later." I didn't know if that would ever happen, but God, I hoped he was right. By the end of the week, Lila had stopped going out altogether. No classes, no coffee runs, just long stretches of time spent in her room with the blinds drawn and her laptop glowing in the dark. I asked her once if she wanted to talk. She didn't respond, just looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and shook her head. June hovered between us like a mediator in a war where both sides were too tired to fight, but too wounded to forgive. One night, she sat next to me on the porch and lit a cigarette, something she hadn't done in years. "You think you did the right thing," she said. exhaling smoke into the night. I know you do. But sometimes the right thing still breaks people. I looked up at the stars, feeling every bit as old as Lila had made me sound on the phone that day. Maybe, I said. But breaking is how you learn what you're really made of. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen before sunrise. She was sitting at the table, hoodie pulled tight around her face, staring at a bowl of cereal that had gone soggy. I sat across from her and waited. After a long silence, she spoke. I saw the comments, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw everything. I didn't ask her which posts or which messages. I already knew. She looked up at me, eyes glassy. You didn't say anything online. You didn't defend me. I nodded. That wasn't my place. Her lip trembled. But you could have told them. You could have explained. I shook my head slowly. You'll have to explain yourself to the world a lot in this life. Better start now. She stared at me for a long time, then pushed her bowl away and stood. You're still selfish, she said, voice breaking, but it didn't sound like an accusation anymore. It sounded like grief, like disappointment, like the words had lost their sharpness but still needed to be said. I didn't correct her. I just watched her leave the room, quietly, like someone who'd finally realized the door wasn't locked, but stepping through it meant walking into the truth naked and unprepared. That was the thing about humiliation, it wasn't permanent. It just had to burn long enough to change you. 3 weeks passed. Long enough for the gossip to die down, but not long enough to forget. Lila started leaving the house again, slowly at first. Quiet walks around the neighborhood, coffee runs with her hoodie still pulled up, short shifts at the campus library where nobody cared who her father was. She didn't talk to me unless she had to, and when she did, her words were clipped, neutral, the way someone might speak to a neighbor they once trusted but now watched from behind a curtain. June tried to keep things light, but there was a sadness in her eyes every time we sat at the dinner table in silence. The damage hadn't shattered us. It had just rearranged the distance between us, made everything slightly crooked. And I'd learned long ago that some kinds of hurt don't need time to heal. They need change. Lila eventually got hired at a smaller design firm on the other side of town. The place wasn't fancy, no shiny logo, no rooftop lunches, but they gave her a desk, a modest paycheck, and a list of tasks she couldn't charm her way out of. I didn't say anything when I found out. June told me over breakfast, cautiously, like it might set something off. She got the offer yesterday, she said, setting down her mug. Seems like a decent place. She starts Monday. I nodded and poured more coffee. Good for her, I said, and that was it. But inside, something small and stubborn curled up in my chest. Pride, maybe. Or hope. Or that quiet flicker of satisfaction you get when your kid finally stops looking for the elevator and starts climbing the stairs. It wasn't until her second week at the new job that she came to me. I was in the garage, knee-deep in a pipe repair for an old friend's house, tools spread out like a surgeon's kit across the workbench. The air smelled of sweat and rust and motor oil. Everything I'd always known, everything I'd always loved. She stood in the doorway for a long time before speaking. I used your old toolbox, she said, her voice soft. Last week. The one with the blue handle. I didn't ask. I looked up and shrugged. It's just a toolbox. She stepped further inside, her shoes echoing against the concrete. They asked me to fix the office printer. Said I was the only one who looked like they knew what they were doing. She let out a short, humorless laugh. I didn't, but I figured it out. I set down my wrench and wiped my hands on a rag. Good, I said. Most things aren't about knowing. They're about being willing to figure it out. She nodded slowly, then sat on the stool across from me, her fingers tapping against her knees. I was angry, she said after a long pause. At you. At myself. At everything. I thought you were punishing me. I didn't respond right away. I wanted her to sit in the silence, to let her words settle. Finally, I said, I wasn't. I was trying to protect you from thinking the world owes you anything. Because it doesn't. And it never will. She swallowed hard. I know that now. There was a moment of quiet between us. Not uncomfortable, not tense. Just honest. She picked up a socket wrench and turned it over in her hands, like she was trying to understand the weight of it. I didn't know you owned part of the company, she said. I mean, I knew you had money, but not that kind of stake. I nodded. I never needed anyone to know. What matters is what I did with it, not how it looked. She studied me then. eyes softer than they'd been in weeks. Why didn't you ever tell me? I thought about that for a second. Because I didn't want you to respect me for what I owned. I wanted you to respect me for who I was. Her shoulders slumped slightly. I didn't do a good job of that. That was the closest she ever came to an apology. And it was enough. She stood to leave, but before she did, she paused by the door. I don't know if I like this new job, she admitted. It's hard. The people are different. They don't care about where I went to school or what I want to be in 10 years. I gave her a small smile. Sounds perfect. She smiled too, a little. It might be, she said. Then she disappeared back into the house, and I turned back to my work, the weight on my shoulders a little lighter than it had been in months. A few days later, I got a message from Mitchell, the operations guy from the board. He said they were reopening the junior developer position and wanted to know if Lila might want to apply again. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I already knew the answer. This wasn't about chances anymore. It was about choices. If Lila wanted it, she'd find her way back. If not, she'd keep walking down the road she was on, and either way, it would be hers. That was all I ever wanted for her. Not success handed down like an inheritance, but earned like a scar. On Sunday, we had dinner together, real dinner, with laughter and seconds and stories that didn't tiptoe around the past. June made lasagna, Lila brought garlic bread, and I just listened as they talked about mundane things. Traffic, a broken washing machine, a friend's engagement. At one point, Lila said something that made June laugh so hard she had to set her wine down. And I sat there, watching them, heart full in a way that had nothing to do with status or wealth. Just love. Complicated, bruised, enduring love. As I washed the dishes that night, Lila joined me at the sink. She handed me plates without a word, her movements fluid, practiced, unpretentious. You're not just a plumber, she said suddenly, her voice low. I smiled without turning to her. I know. She dried a dish and set it in the rack. But you're also not just a board member. I looked over at her, surprised. She met my gaze and nodded. You're just you, and I'm finally okay with that. We finished the dishes in silence. But this time, it felt like peace. If this story hit you in the heart the way it did for us, if you've ever been torn between protecting someone you love and letting them grow the hard way, then you understand the weight of silence, the cost of truth, and the power of earned respect. Would you have done what this father did? Or taken a softer path? Let us know in the comments. And if stories like this resonate with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more raw, real-life family drama that dives deep into the messy middle of love, pride, and personal growth. See you soon in the next story.